Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Since the dev server is closed now, it's time to have a look at the datamines and the extra additional information that we didn't cover in the videos. This dev server was quite hectic. There was a lot of stuff in it, and it was quite nice to cover. We were able to do it in pretty good time, but there was a ton of different vehicles, and I've got a feeling that this isn't the end of it. I'm pretty sure they'll either do another dev server, or when this comes to live, there will be a bunch more stuff in this update. If there isn't, I'll be heavily surprised, especially since there's just some stuff sat in the files, just chilling there, not really doing too much, and we obviously already had a look at that, so there's not really much point in sorting that out. We're able to cover every single one of the vehicles on the dev server, and in the datamine, they go through all of the general stats. I'll leave the links in the description if you want to see the datamines themselves, but we'll go through it in this video. Thank you to Ashida for putting it all together, and so we can have a look at it, and also the team behind it for bringing us this information. To start off with, there's a bunch of sabres, the F-86, F-35, and also the F-40s that get access to two 750-pound bomb loadouts, which is kind of annoying, because they already had 1,000-pounders, so now this is just an additional modification to be able to research. The F-14A now actually has two drop tanks, before it didn't have any, which is really nice. A lot of the changes that they've actually made to a lot of the higher tier kind of loadouts are to remove the kind of the issue with the stock missiles and then having the same missiles but in a different loadout. So there is a ton of like little changes here and there with different slots on the vehicle and their custom loadouts. But yeah, the F-14 now has two drop tanks. It looks really cool, and I've got to say, they are really nice. They also drop individually, which is cool, and you know, the F-14 is one of those vehicles that does really chug fuel. So if you don't have the fuel tanks, you're going to be kind of screwed because of that. But yeah, they've added a ton of different things in the form of different custom loadouts, so you'll probably have to sort that out later on, but that's okay. You know, you can have a bit of fun with it. The Ju-87B2, it got access to a 1,000-kilo bomb, so you can just hammer people with that. I think all the Ju-87s now have the 1,000-kilo bomb. It's really good in ground forces and naval. You just spawn in the plane and then dump it on somebody and then leave. It works really well. And also, the Su-22s and Su-17M4 now has 4 drop tanks instead of 2, which is kind of cool. And the BB-1 and the Su-2s, they now have some new loadouts. So 8 50 kilos, 8 100s, and also 2 500 kilos, which I think is probably the loadout that most people are going to use, which is nice as well. The Gripens now have 3 drop tanks instead of 1 stock, so you can have more options. The JH-7A lost a bunch of its bombs from its standard stock loadouts. Instead of 22, it only has 12 now. And the F-104 ASA had some loadouts changed too, along with a bunch of other vehicles. The Swedish actually got a bunch of custom loadouts added to them, such as the A-29, J-29G, and J-29F, which is nice. All of those also got new rockets, which is cool. And then the Drakens also got some drop tanks as well. So if you run out of fuel on those, you can now bring more. The MH-60L DAP for the Americans, they added a bunch of guns to it. So 2 GAU-19s, 2 LR-30s, and also 2 miniguns, the M134s. So if you want to bring those along, you can do. And also, at the same time, they changed the custom loadout slots to add the guns in, so they aren't in the way of all of the other stuff. They added a bunch of automatic flaps into the game. I didn't actually talk about this, but basically they added a system now where if you are at specific speeds with specific vehicles, if they had automatic flaps, then you can now, you know, move them around, which I think is kind of cool. This means that you're able to do a ton of stuff with these different vehicles, and I think that's super important. And I think overall that's actually really nice to see, you know, what they've done there. I'll try and find the actual change itself, because it did sound really cool what they were doing, and hopefully it means that people can actually understand it a little bit better than at least I can. It says automatic adjustment of the flap extension limit or automatic retraction of the flap depending on the current speed has been given or added to the aircraft with automatic flaps, floating type flaps, and flaps with protected blow-up mechanisms. So this includes the Bearcats, P-51H, Harriers, F-14s, the F-5, F-16s. There's a ton of different ones, so make sure to check out the list. But I think it's actually really cool that they've done this. So means that the vehicles have a little bit more use, and it will just do it automatically. The only question is, will you be able to turn it off? And that is going to be interesting to see. They also changed over the A35B. It's now, its flight model has been ported over to the new format, and they also did a few changes to it as well. The A6M3 has an increased rip speed of 703 kilometers an hour instead of 630. The A6M5s and 6, they've increased their rip speed as well to 777, and the A7, the flaps now retract at 180 kilometers IAS and fully retract at 350. So overall, some nice changes there. Means that you'll be able to move around with your Japanese vehicles a little bit better. They did a bunch of flight model changes to the AMX as well, so if you are a person who's interested in that, make sure to check that out, because there is a ton of different changes for that vehicle specifically. They've also changed the flight model of the F5E. That's a huge one, since of course, that one was been pretty broken for the longest time, so we'll have to see what that actually ends up, sorting out. One of the little cool things is the LA5F and the LA5FN. They have enabled the cockpit canopy control, which I think is really cool. I really like the fact that they've done that, and also they've made it so certain flaps won't deploy above certain speeds. So for example, the Lightning F6 flaps will not deploy above 463 kilometers an hour, so you've got to be a bit careful with that and how you want to maneuver around the air. And that's happened with a ton of these different vehicles. So the way that flaps are going to work may be super dodgy to you, but you'll get used to it over time as always. The A6E, tram and A7 got ejection seats, so did the A7E, so that's lovely to see for those vehicles. And also the F-14A and B, they added a volumetric afterburner, and which is just a wonderful name. Same with the F-15A, J as well. Both of those, and the BAS, also got it. They did completely change also the custom loadouts. They nearly doubled them, so I wonder what they're going to do there and what's going to happen. The countermeasures, though, no longer fire separately on those vehicles and all of the other high-tier vehicles too, which just seems a little bit weird to me. The F-100s also got their ejection seat added, which is kind of cool, and a lot of other vehicles got their volumetric afterburner too. The F-89B, C, and also the D, so there you go. I don't think the 89C is even in the game though, so I'm wondering what they're actually going to do with that vehicle. The Harrier GS7 got an MLWS, the PVS 2000, so that's quite a nice little buff to it. They changed some limits on turrets for certain vehicles, such as the Heinkel, the HE111, H16, and now the IL-28 actually finally has its own FM, so it didn't for the longest time. So now it will actually be able to fly properly. The IL-10 also, they changed the gun on it, the turret. Instead of the UBT machine gun, it's the UBK. And the J5N now has more 30mm Type 5 cannon rounds. It now has 100 rounds per gun, but it actually has less 20mm ones. So it only has 200 now per gun. So overall, I think it loses out, unfortunately. The JH7A now has TV optics, which is huge. And also the Jaguar IS, it has the target pod thermal resolution has been increased. So instead of 500 by 300, it's now 800 by 600, which will help it out in its desired role. So that's really nice to see too. And also, all of the Key 61s, the 12.7mm machine guns on them, now massively got, hit Before they had 400 rounds per gun, now they only have 250, and that completely sucks. They also added a Mach limit for a lot of GBUs, Mach 1.01. Before there wasn't one, so you could just kind of do it whenever you felt like. For all of the Spitfires, by the way, and also the Seafires, they added wing flex, which is super cool. So that is, really nice to see. Make sure to test it out so you can just see them, flexing backwards, especially with Spitfires being such maneuverable aircraft. I think overall that's just really cool to see. The Su-25T and Su-39 had an optic added to them, so we'll have to see how that goes with it. That new Su-25 has a really nice optic, but I still don't think it will be in a good place, unfortunately. And then also, they continue with this countermeasures no longer firing separately thing with the Tornadoes and the AK-141. I'm guessing they're setting up for when they do the different types of countermeasures, because in the roadmap they said that they're gonna have a setup where you fire the countermeasures independently from each other, so that'll be interesting to see. They also added wing flex to the Su-9 and 11, and also added an RWR to the Su-27, which is the SBO-15. But also, it's a unique one and doesn't actually have a file yet. So my guess is the Su-27 is going to be getting a pretty interesting RWR on it at some point. They made a ton of sensor changes as well, and this is just huge. For a lot of the higher vehicles, of course, the sensors and radars and RWRs are one of the most important things nowadays on a lot of these vehicles. The JL7A, the search scope is now down to 20 kilometers, whereas the JL10A, the Type 1492, an APG-66J, and many other ones, they changed the pulse to LPRF and also the MPRF ACM. It has new lines, which are angular accuracy 0.05 and distance accuracy of 12. But there is so many different changes on these sensors. I would highly just recommend going to read about them, because every single one got changed. And you know how we talked about before how a lot of these vehicles nowadays, like, they just change from update to update? Or we had the massive RWR update. This one we're having the massive radar update. This one we're also having, looking at active radar homing missiles. There's so many different things going on, and you just need to have a look at them, because it's impossible to actually go through them all now, because there's so many of them. The amount of work that must go into trying to sort all of these out is just crazy, which is quite fun. The ship changes for the Paris, the parts of the ammo of the armor belt have gone to 210 millimeters instead of 250, and also they've rotated 3 of the 20 millimeter Oerlikon Mark IIs by 180 degrees. The Dratch, the dead zone was never applied on the 88 millimeter, so they fixed that, so you could just fire it wherever you wanted. The Kurama, the parts of the Citadel has been changed to the RDA, which is the same as all of the other parts. The Roanoke is the same. They've increased the empty mass of the Roanoke, so we'll have to see how that goes. But the Cyclone has also decreased, so a slight difference there. The Barker, the USS Barker, the second 4-inch cannon and also the third 4-inch cannon have better limits, so you'll be able to fire them at better areas. And also the Mitch and the Wilkinson, the ammunition charges can now cause fatal fires. Thank God, because those things are really annoying to face and have silly survivability because of changes like that for some reason, so thank God they've fixed it. It's really funny, actually. Ashida put a little note on the Datamines. It says, I do not have the mental stability currently to do the tank's DM changes. If any of you is interested enough, you can go do it. And yeah, there's so many of them, man. Like, as I said, every update, there's more and more and more stuff, and it's just crazy the amount that they're changing. The big one is the challenges. They're changing the mantlet on it, so that's one to check out, and hopefully, there'll be other ones too. The BT-5 is getting increased engine horsepower, so it's now going up to 400. The FT-09 is going up to 320, which is nice, but a lot of vehicles are actually losing some RPM on their engine. Some are increasing, but yeah, overall it's a bit all over the place with that setup. The Panzer IV now brakes better, so, you know, your brakes will work, which is quite nice. And the Baglet Panzer is finally getting nerfed. After getting buffed like 50 times, it is now time to nerf it. So it now is going to have 600 horsepower instead of 720. So at least it'll be a little bit slower. Still busted as all hell, but at least it'll be a little bit slower. They actually reduced the rangefinder usefulness on the Shock Cals and also the Magak 6s. Basically, the default distance is now 1,000 instead of 1,200. For the AB-41, they removed a loader and added a second machine gunner, whose role is driver or substitute for commander. The BTR-80, they changed the gearbox. They added 4 gears and 1 reverse, so we'll have to see how that goes. The big buff is the Cheeto and the Cheeto Late. Their horsepower has actually increased to 500 horsepower, which is really good. It used to be 400, so they're going to motor a little bit better. The Type 93 also has increased horsepower to 170, so I'll be able to motor even more. And the BT-42 has a higher RPM than previously. Same with the ITO 90M, which is kind of nice. Ton of different gearbox changes on so many different vehicles. Like, once again, there's just a million changes, so if specifically you're interested in one, make sure to check it out. They've increased the horsepower of the T-44 to 520, the RBT-5, they've also increased its horsepower alongside the other BTs, and also the T-80, they've actually removed the loader and added a commander. The roles are, of course, commander and loader, and substitutes for driver and gunner. They've also increased the engine max RPM on it, so that should be quite nice too. But overall, you can just see there's so many changes. It's insane how many changes they've thrown in. This one is definitely one to kind of, you know, have a look at a bunch of different stuff. Like, they've done a bunch of bomb changes too. So the 10 kilo SD-10Cs, their mass is now 10 kilos instead of 7, which was always kind of weird. And the 4,000 pound HC Mark IV bomb, which is the one they just added to the Canberra, they've changed it from Amatol to RDX TNT, so its explosive mass has increased by about 50-60 kilos, which is quite a decent hit, you know. They've also done a bunch of machine gun changes and also just general changes to guns. For example, the 40mm Akan M70B cannons, the Slurpager, as I like to call it, the SLPPRJ M90, they've removed the Sabo from the belt and also done the same one on the M01. The 57mm 2890 cannon, the 3UB M22, they've removed the Sabo from that as well. The HM6 SAM, the good old missile, they've removed proximity fuse from it, which is a huge deal. For the 60mm, the 6070 cannon, the Auto HVG cannon, the M300, they've removed the Sabo from it. I'm very surprised. The 57mm S68 cannon, the DKY1, so that's the WZ305 for China. The arming distance is now 200 meters instead of 500, so that is a much better setup. The 75mm 41M cannon, the 4236M, the speed has increased of it, and also it fires APHE BC, and the mass has also increased, so that should be a much better round. The 75mm lightweight Type 1 Model 2 cannon has increased muzzle velocity, and there's a bunch of tiny changes here when it comes to muzzle velocity of cannons / rounds, and also everything else that's going on. So, for example, like the Stu-42, the PZGR it fires, it's now at 480 meters per second instead of 475. So there's a lot of little changes like that, right? Same with stuff like the naval weaponry changes. They've changed a lot of AAs and also higher stuff as well. Changed or added fuse delays to them, but the fuse delays are 0 seconds. And also missile changes. Chaff, they've actually added a radar profile too, which is surprising it wasn't there before. And also the HJ8A, C, E, H, and L, the drag coefficient when suspended, has gone from 0.001 to 0.018, so it actually has weight now instead of what it had before. The PL11, the guidance from the radar seeker, is now 45 instead of 90. but the receiver range is 50, so overall quite a large nerf, at least it seems like it. And they've actually made the drag coefficient of the TY90 0.018 instead of 0.00035, which is what it was before, which is insanely low. They hugely buffed a bunch of missiles for the French. So, for example, the Matra R50 Magic 1, the wing area multiplier has gone from 1.3 to 1.45. The Finns AOA has gone from 15.3 to 32.04, which is insane. And the delay is now 0.3 seconds instead of 0.5. So, massive buffs to the Magic 1. They've also done the same buffs to the Magic 2. And also to the 530F, they've hugely reduced its angle gate rate and also increased its receiver. And the antenna they've actually put to 5 instead of 12. So we'll have to see how that goes for the 530s, but the 550s are in a really nice place. The Aspides, of course, got the same change as previously. The PL7s also basically got the same change as the Magic 2, since that's what they are. And the R23R, the wonderful missile that we talked about previously, so the power that it has on the transmitter is now 270 instead of 200, and the receiver is 35 instead of 25. Won't make a single piece of difference. But the R24R, they did the same changes to, apart from the angle gate rate is now 30 instead of 90. That's the same with all the R27s, including the ER1, the R, the R1, and the ER. So we'll have to see what goes on with those. They've done a bunch of different bomb changes too, and semi-active radar homing changes, so that's going to completely change the meta once again. And also the 40cm 1926 DA torpedo, they obviously have changed that too, where they've changed the drop speed range so, it isn't negative, which is always an interesting one. And also the values have been increased in arcade. The aircraft gun changes, there's a few different ones, not a huge set though, just slight mass changes and speed changes in places, so nothing too crazy there, and the list goes on. Those are the available data mines, and you can see there's just a ton of stuff. A ridiculous amount that's happening in this update. As always with these updates, like every update now, it's just let's keep piling on all the crazy stuff, and people always say nothing ever changes in War Thunder. If anything, everything always changes. I don't know a single game that does as many changes as War Thunder does. Anyway, look after yourselves, peace be with you, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Schnitzel Stroker, Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Carrion Crow, Nicholas Richardson, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, B. Young, Opium Prime, Masonocrat, Lafouche, Alan Hacker, Sem Arslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.